My name is Rachel Storm. Today is January 31st, 2022, and I'm here today with Lark Birdsong, who's going to talk about her connections to the Colorado explosion and her background, and tell us a little bit more about that. So we can really start anywhere. I asked you some questions about kind of being with the explosion. So we can start earlier in life, or we can start just with the explosion and pop back to those other things if you'd like to. What do you think is a good starting spot?
Well, let me ask you a quick question.
Sure.
First. Do you edit too as necessary?
If there are things that need to be redacted,
Yeah,
we can
okay.
redact those. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just let you guide me. I'm
Okay.
able to go wherever you think
Okay.
is the best thing, so I'll just follow your lead.
How about we start with your first memory of basketball?
Okay. Gosh, my first memory was when I was a little kid, and I'd play with my brothers. I was sandwiched in between two brothers at that time, and so it was just backyard pickup, and then we were able to play just pickup games. You know, so that was really my first memory.
Did you, you talked about playing a whole bunch of different sports when you were young. What did you get into first? What were you really excited about?
Well, when I was growing up, there were no formalized opportunities for girls where I lived other than softball. So whatever we did, it was through kids getting together to play in the neighborhood, whether it was with a ball and soccer or something. And the only formalized thing that we had was softball at that time for girls my age. And my mom was just such a dear woman. She had 5 kids eventually, and she was so eager to help all of her kids and take us to the events that we wanted to. So I was lucky that my mom got me into softball. And so I grew up playing formalized softball, and the rest was just take as we can. Because the Title IX didn't come into play until 1972, so there was no opportunities for girls to play in high schools and middle schools, you name it.
Right. And that it was even including softball, so you played with maybe a city league or something like that?
Yes, it was not even a city league. It was, well, I guess it would have been a city league. It was like a Jefferson County League, or it was Clear Creek County League. It was organized by a smaller local entity.
Yeah. So, so your experiences were playing with your brothers, with other girls from the county that were really interested in
softball.
In softball.
Yes.
So basketball and softball. Any other sports?
Well, in college I played tennis, field hockey, and basketball. And I had the opportunity to play softball in college, but what was really a mistake on my part, in hindsight, was I was considered the second best shortstop in the state. The first best shortstop in the state was already at the University of Northern Colorado, and I couldn't get myself to see myself sitting. I knew she was better than me, but I just couldn't get my ego to be on a team and not play. And so I went out for field hockey that year and track. And in hindsight, I wish I would have, because they had just such an excellent team. And Sharon Peterson was the shortstop, and she was tremendous, much better than me.
Yeah, you had mentioned that on your background form, that you would have made a different decision.
Yes.
So you, instead of doing softball, you went the basketball route?
I did start with basketball, yeah.
So, so tell me about playing college ball.
Well, it was so rewarding because we had the opportunity to play with a dedicated coach. We had competition with other universities throughout the, I'd say, Midwest area. We traveled in cars. We had team uniforms. We had just everything that we would have wanted to have if they had, allowed girls to have that in high school, like boys did. So it just fulfilled a lot of needs, because we got to see how good we were, and then we were able to bond as, teammates do, and I'm still in touch with some of the coaches and some of the players from that era. So it fulfilled things as bonding does.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you went to college, was that after Title IX or before Title IX? Where did that fall into?
It was before Title IX. So University of Northern Colorado was dedicated at that time to helping women and girls in sports. So they were a little bit ahead of the curve, but it was pre-Title IX.
I ask because that is interesting to me that like the University of Northern Colorado just made those decisions. Was that something that was campus-wide? Did you see that in, say, colleges that normally would be predominantly male, that you saw more opportunities for women, or?
I don't really know the answer to that. I just know UNC had like Rosemary Fry and Gloria Rodriguez, Kathy Hildreth. They all just were dedicated to giving women opportunities. So they had sports, multiple sports for women to participate in, and they were totally dedicated to giving us that opportunity. And then the schools we played against, like BYU was in one of the schools. We played up in, I don't remember if we played Wyoming or not, but we just played kind of in this, states. We went down to New Mexico and played. So it was nice that we had the opportunity pre-Title IX.
Right. So after UNC, you went to grad school?
I did. I went out to North Carolina.
And did you continue with basketball while you were in grad school, or?
No, I didn't. I just focused on getting my master's in education. And from there, it was considered one of the top schools. And so I dedicated myself to that, and that was right at the beginning. That was 72, 73-ish, I think. And when I was finished, because it was one of the top schools, the University of Iowa was in contact with them, and it was right then at the start of Title IX, and so they had to hire a lot of people, and so they contacted the professors at UNC, and they said, hey, who do you have? We have these positions we need filled. And so I was recommended, and I was able to go to the University of Iowa, and one of the premier people for Title IX, Christine Grant, was at Iowa and hired me.
So how were they looking specifically for, as far as like filling these coaching positions, were they looking specifically for women who had basketball backgrounds but also had education backgrounds? Or how did you, since you weren't playing while you were in grad school, how did that connection happen for you?
Well, at that time, they had dedicated physical education departments, so I was getting a master's in education, and it had a physical education component to it. And then they wanted people who had played sports and also who had master's degrees. So with those two skill sets in mind, I had just finished my master's. And then because it was Title IX, the University of Iowa was ahead of the curve, whereas when Title IX was coming on, a lot of the universities resisted fielding teams and wanted to fight the legislation. The University of Iowa wasn't like that. Christine Grant was there, Bump Elliott was there, and President Sandy Boyd, the head of the University of Iowa, said, hey, we're going to do this right. So he created a separate division for women, and it was headed by Christine Grant. So she administered her own budget, did all of her own hiring, and her own administration. Over here, Bump Elliott did the same thing. So Christine did not report to Bump. Bump did not report to Christine. They separately reported to President Boyd.
Wow.
And they made sure that they were in compliance, and then they knew they wanted to fund those sports at Iowa, so they did. They just filled up their budget so that they could hire all of the sports coaches. So between like 72 and 74, they filled all of the, I don't know if it was 8 or 9 sports, but they were hiring all the coaches.
Coming in right as Title IX is appearing in schools all over the place, oftentimes, as you mentioned, not at University of Iowa, but in other places where it's kind of being forced onto the administration where they maybe don't want it, but they have to. And then at the same time, you're coming in with a whole bunch of new women coaches coaching new sports programs. What was that like? Was there were you working together with other coaches in other sports? Was it more just really focused on basketball and getting your program up and going? What was that like?
Well, I think we were extremely lucky to have Christine Grant as our administrator, and then Sandy Boyd as the president, and Bump Elliott for the men, because they worked so well together and they were so equally dedicated to giving opportunities to everyone. That was not true in many other schools. It was a pleasure to be at the University of Iowa, and Christine became a very close friend of mine for about 45 years, and she just passed this last December 31st.
I'm sorry.
And there's huge tributes to her out there about her impact on the school. But what Christine decided was that all the sports should be equal at that time. And so if basketball got X amount of funding per athlete, so did tennis, so did swimming, so did gymnastics. And so she was dedicated to equal opportunities for everyone. And it made it where we all as coaches, we all felt very fond of each other and fond of each other's successes. And there wasn't a hierarchy at that time of more funding from one for the other. And then the other thing that Christine was dedicated to, she's Scottish, and she was very much invested in education and raising, growing, helping really good people. And because she was one, you just felt like, couldn't let her down. So it was lucky that I was at Iowa, and I learned a lot, and tremendously strong relationships still there because I think of the way it was structured.
So when you came in, had the women's basketball team already existed?
Well, I want to honor the people before me because certainly if Title IX had, instead of passing in 1972, it had passed in 1962, there would have been people before me, and they wanted that. And so they did what they could. There were club sports. There were teams that did travel and play each other. They just weren't funded. They weren't recognized. But certainly I was in this recently when Christine passed, there was a lot of things written, and I wrote a tribute to Christine, and one of the things I wanted to emphasize was that I was the first basketball person hired under Title IX, but there were many wonderful people, women before me, who would have loved for Title IX to be 70 or 55 or you name it. So I was just lucky.
So what was the startup of kind of that like? I mean, you had girls who were playing on the team. Did you have other coaches that you were working with, or were you the only coach?
No, well, we had women on the team, and I had an assistant coach, and then we had managers who would volunteer. You know, they might be students in other sports or educations, and then they would volunteer to be managers. I had a statistician, and so I had staffing, and at that time also we tried to have some JV teams so that some more kids could have some opportunities.
Sure.
And so I had staffing. It was very, very beginning staffing, and sometimes like I didn't have enough budget to have jerseys, player practice jerseys, so I bought them, and so that some of that was going on. But I think we were just so all in and so glad to have the opportunities that we just did what we needed to do to make things happen.
Yeah. So then when did this is very much learning for me because I was in band, so I was always at basketball games, but I never played. The organization of division organization, like did that happen during your tenure at Iowa? How did that kind of come about?
Initially, there was the AIAW, and it was the organizing body for women athletics. and it was a counterpart to the NCAA.
Okay.
So the AIAW organized the sports, the competitions, the tournaments, those kinds of things. And at a certain point, the NCAA did take over, and AIAW went out of existence. But that was kind of the governance that was going on at that time.
So then what grouping did that put Iowa into? As far as was it regionally broken up, or
regionally in terms of the kind of conference competition, and then when the championships happened, it happened throughout the United States.
Fantastic. So how do you come into a program that's brand new and put it together? How does that work? How do you make decisions about training and how the strategies of the team, things like that?
It's like starting up anything, and that's what I've done in my life quite a bit, is I've had to just figure things out and make things happen. And so that was a situation where, okay, we need to figure this out. And so whatever was presented, I'd had the opportunity to talk to other people. I'd study a lot through books. Lute Olson was there at the time, and Jim Rosborough, and I would talk to them from time to time to get some of their advice, because they were the men's coaches on the men's team, and they had some advice that was worthy for me to listen to. So I just used what resources I could, and then just tried to feel and sense the times and my players and what their needs were, and just put things together. You know, trial and error at times. Some things worked, some things didn't work.
Yeah. So then, because Iowa had already been kind of ahead of the curve, did you have a good team? Were they competitive in
Not initially. And initially we didn't have scholarships. My first 3 years we didn't have scholarships. And the other thing that was a little difficult for us was Iowa had, early on, they had opportunities for girls to play in high school, but it was 6-player basketball. So you either learned offense or you learned defense. So because you couldn't cross the midcourt line. And so what happened for us was almost 95% of our players would come from Iowa, and they would come to play basketball, but they either knew how to play defense or offense. So that was really difficult, because other states, the kids had been playing now for a bit of time. They'd been playing the full court game.
Okay.
And so we had to spend remedial time, so to speak, to get them to learn this or that. So the first 3 years were difficult because we were just starting to build, and then for the first time teach them how to shoot, or teach them how to play defense. And then as we started to accumulate a little bit, and then I think it was my last 2 years we were able to offer scholarships, but Christine again was dedicated to equal opportunities for everybody. And so we didn't have full rides at that time, and I could have one scholarship, but I had to divide it into 4 so that 4 people could get it. And so I was able to get a really good player from Minnesota, Cindy Hogyord, and she ended up being on the Olympic team, Olympic contender for the Olympics in the 80s when we didn't go to the Olympics. But that helped to bring in some talent that knew both sides of the court already. And so in the last 2 years we started to have some success. So.
That's really fascinating, that because Iowa did have such a long history of girls playing basketball, but 6-player, that it actually came in as kind of a something that needed to be reworked. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So you were at Iowa for 5 years?
Yes.
And what moved you away from that?
Well, in the long haul, I liked business quite a bit, and I liked my family back in Colorado, and I knew I wanted to have a child,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't quite at that time see myself dedicating my entire life to college sports.
Mm-hmm.
And then you are somewhat, if not quite a bit, tied to the success of high school players and whether they come to your school or not. And it never made sense to me too much to have that be so much a part of my success. I didn't like recruiting that much. I did love the work and the intensity with the players. I didn't like that component of the sport. So I decided I'd come back to Colorado, and I ended up getting my MBA in finance and accounting here. And have not regretted it. I had my daughter. I was with my family. So, yeah.
So, what were the big differences between when you started at Iowa and when you left Iowa?
Well, even in that short period of time, it was more formalized, a little bit more recognition.
Mm-hmm.
It was still a teeny little baby compared to where it is today.
Mm-hmm.
But I like the fact that they'd had some opportunities to reward students with scholarships, and it was starting to trend towards where it is today. So we provided the seed for where Iowa is today, and Iowa has a great program under Lisa Bluter. She's really a talented coach, and they've done very, very, very well. And they honor us frequently. They remember our history. And Lisa Bluter and I, we're like Christine's bookends. I was her first hire, and Lisa was her last hire. And they tend to like to have the players come back. And so I think because we had such a good base with our players, and they're really good people, they're still in the community today, a lot of them. And because Christine was so well honored, we have an opportunity to love the Iowa program to this day and still be connected to it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you came back to Colorado.
Yes.
And you're in school again, you're with your family. There was a basketball gap in there?
There was. I was back into the business world. I was working with a Fiserv company. First Trust was part of Fiserv, I think, at that time. And people knew that I had the history of the University of Iowa and my background. And one of my friends, Ann Price, saw an article, I think it was in Time or U.S. News and World, I forget. She says, hey, they're looking for a professional league, and they have 7 out of 8 teams picked. They're looking for one more city. So I remember looking at the article, and I thought, that's kind of interesting. I wonder if we could get one here. So I contacted the co-founder, Steve Hams, and said, hey, we're from Denver. We may be interested. Is there an opportunity, and what do we need to do? And Steve said, well, yes, there's 2 or 3 other cities that are been vying for this spot, and we're pretty close to picking. So if you wanted to be considered, you'd have to move pretty quickly. And so, lo and behold, talked to a few people, and we decided we'd do it. So set out, and our strategy at that time, because there was no social media, there was no email, even there was no text, we had to use what was available. So what we decided to do was to see if we could get the women in the city involved who were leaders, some of the men who were leaders, and say, hey, we have this opportunity to bring women's pro team to Colorado. We have to move pretty quickly. And so we involved Mayor Webb. We involved people like Joy Burns, Lorraine Rulian, and Joy was a former DU trustee. Lorraine was head of the Women's Bank. Diane Went from DU, longtime supporter of women's athletics. And we just kind of said, hey, we need to get our city to say, hey, you'd be a great basketball. So Mayor Webb indicated we'd have use of the Coliseum at that time, Denver Coliseum, and indicated support. And then because our only avenue to quickly show support was through the fax machines, we gave everybody this fax, and we said, hey, this is what we need to do, is just send these letters of support in your own words and why you would support it. and what your position is to this number. And we actually, I guess, Steve told me, he said, the reason we picked you is because you had so many letters of support, nobody else could get through on the fax machine. So the strategy worked, and they did pick us. And then we needed to, and I was still working at Fiserv at the time, and we needed to get things going very quickly because we were the last team picked, and we had the opportunity to play, gosh, in about 6 months. And so everything had to be done. We had to find office space. We had to get in and find times on the calendar in the Coliseum to play our home games. And boy, that was tough. That was one of the tougher things. We had to, I had to hire coaches. We had to draft players. I had to hire staff, get uniforms. We had to get, we just had to get everything, you know.
Wow.
So anyway, but the reason why it worked is I had such a talented staff. And Ann Price had done sponsorships before. John Nillen had worked at the Nuggets. We had Jason Booth, who knew how to do volunteers in the business office. Hope Schuler did a lot of the PR things and a lot of the other volunteer things that we needed to have done. Emily Little had worked in ticketing before. We had Tracy Williams as our first PR person, and then Tim Simmons, who had also worked for the Nuggets, was in our PR team. So because we had such a talented staff, we were able just to get all these things done. And then we were also lucky because Reebok was going to only fund 4 teams. And because our budget was so short, they had picked 3 of the teams to fund. And that funding meant they'd give us some money. They'd give us our jerseys and stuff. And I thought, oh my gosh. So anyway, one of my tasks initially was to make sure Reebok picked us. And I kept coming at them with reasons why the Colorado Explosion would be the last team to pick and would be really wise for you as a sponsor. And lo and behold, they did pick us just barely by the skin of our teeth. But such a relief, to have that and to have that sponsorship. So, and then John Meadows was at Coors at the time, and I had met with him a couple of times, and he had said, there's something on the horizon. And I kept guessing. I said, well, what is it? Is it Nike that's coming in? Is it? He says, nope. He said, I can't tell you. It's private information. But he said, there is something coming in. He said, so you're going to have to show me why we would want to sponsor you. And I'd already developed somewhat of a plan to roll things out and what we needed to do. And so I said, okay, let's meet again and I'll show you that. And we did. And he said, I didn't realize you were as far along as you are. And he said, so let me see what I can do. So then John did get some money for us through Coors. And because they weren't sold as franchises, and so we had to vet every sponsor through headquarters, because if headquarters had signed, say, a beer company, a national beer company at that time, they would have preempted having any local sponsorship. Well, they hadn't at that time, so we were able to get Coors in. Yeah, I know. And because Coors is one of the big, companies. We then got Norwest Bank at the time. They were a big bank. And, we had Columbia Health. They were big at the time. So we had some nice big sponsors. The Rocky Mountain News also was our sponsor at that time. And the funds compared to the men's side were just de minimis. But at least we had some credence with people backing us, and we had some funds. The budget still was very, very low. I just can't say enough about the talented staff that did it. And then we hired Cheryl Estes as a coach, and she was a very good coach for us, and Dana Ewing and Gail Hook were her assistants, and we just set about making a really great team.
So it sounds like this was really quick from start to finish. What was your timeline from when you first saw that, or your time from when you first saw that announcement to the first game?
When we were picked, I believe it was right at the end of March of '96, beginning of April. And then our first game was in, I think, October-ish. I mean, it was, when I look back, I'm not quite sure how we did it, but I will say everybody was all in. And you would see people at the offices Saturday and Sundays, and we ended up having a very nice office, which had a big, wide open space that we could have events in, and the office were around it. And Joy Burns leased that to us. And then in the off times we could have kids in there. You know, they could be doing their things while their mom or dads were working. And so we ended up having a very lucky space for that, and people that were really dedicated. And they made it happen.
So why Explosion? Where did that name come from?
Okay. Well, we were in the conference room trying to figure out, gosh, how do we name our team? And then all the names had to be vetted. So we had some names that we thought would be worthy and representative of the area. And they were ruled out by the headquarters, and I don't remember what those names were. But then we just kept at it, and we said we're just like exploding on the event. And it was John Millen who came up with the idea, and then we decided we would want the X because then we could do some marketing things with that. And so we posed that to the headquarters. They said yes, and so we decided to go with that. And then I think kind of a fun little fact is we had then to design our jerseys, and Jim Jensen, who was a former Bronco, he was also a talented artist, he designed our logo for us. And I gave those storyboards to History Colorado, and you can see the iterations of things that we wanted to choose, and we finally chose this one. And the color, Lorraine Orwellian liked the colors that we picked, and she had been really key for us as the Women's Bank head. And so I liked the colors, everybody liked the colors, so we decided to go ahead and go with those.
That's fantastic. So what were the other cities that had teams?
So hopefully I'll remember them all. There are 8 of us. So initially there was Colorado, San Jose, Seattle, Portland, Columbia, New England, Richmond, and I'm forgetting the last one.
But mostly west side of the United States?
No, there was Columbia, New England, Richmond, and the other one was on the, so it was kind of west-east.
Right.
We didn't have much in the middle.
Right.
We were probably the most middle one.
Right.
And it evolved over time because some cities did more or less with their teams, and they tried, and the folks at headquarters tried to expand. And you know how I'd mentioned John Meadows said there's something on the horizon, but he wouldn't tell me what it was. Well, I kept guessing, and I guessed wrong. I didn't realize the Wnba was already contacting people 2 or 3 years out, just as we were beginning to roll out. And they wanted to, at that time, John told me David Stern wanted to own basketball, so it meant everything, overseas, junior, women's, and so they were rolling out the WNBA. And so they came out, and they decided not to compete with men sports, because we went October through February-ish, March-ish, and they did summertime, because they decided they might have a better opportunity to have media attention, and fan attention in the summertime. So, and they still have that model. But when they came out in our final year, the year where the start of the 3rd year, we just couldn't get any media attention. We couldn't. Sponsors were drifting over here.
Sure.
I mean, it became very, very difficult. And they already had an established model. They had funding from the parent teams, the NBAs, and it became very difficult to survive.
So going back to the Explosion, how you had mentioned that recruiting wasn't your favorite thing, recruiting out of high school. How did you recruit for the Explosion?
Well, you don't really recruit that much. What the model for the ABL was that they would find players coming out of college that would want to play, and they would ask them if they'd be interested in playing the ABL, and they would negotiate salaries with them,
Mhm.
and they had their eye on certain players, that were star players,
Mhm.
and the Olympics were in play at that time. Some of them would have been, or had been on Olympic teams, and so they really set the players up for their teams, and then largely they determined where the players were going to play in what cities, and they wanted parity amongst all of their 8 teams. So they looked at things like the very first year we were lucky to have Shelley Sheets, because Shelley Sheets was a star key player up at CU, and Silberry had done a great job of establishing a program there. It was on the national level. Fan attendance was pretty strong for women's sports at that time, and Shelley did a great job as their point guard. So when there was a local player that was interested in playing in the ABL that could potentially draw, they would put the local player in. So it was largely the headquarter saying, and then where I would do I'd lobby, I'd try to say, hey, Steve or Gary, we would really like to have this player here. And then after the first teams were settled and allocated with parity, then we could then start trading in that second year if we felt a player wasn't happy, or if we had a void at a point guard, or
So how do you get? I mean, do as far as your crowds, the people that come to see the games, are there? Did they come over from men's basketball? Were they women's? Coming out at were they? College women's basketball fans? Where was your fan base coming from?
Well, we tried different strategies at different times, but we felt that people who liked college basketball, women's college basketball, would be a demo that we would like. We felt mothers and fathers with daughters who were playing would be an avenue that would like our team. So those were 2 really strong thrusts for us that we would try to market to. And we did not have a lot of marketing dollars. Our budget came from headquarters, and so if I got sponsorship money, it would go there. I had some checking account here to pay things quickly, but if I got a $50,000 sponsorship, that check went to headquarters. So we had a budget that we had to live within, and I think our budget for marketing was around $40,000 a year. And so it was very, very difficult for us to pay for certain things. The Rocky Mountain, our sponsorship with the Rocky Mountain News gave us some ad time, and then we would look at doing promos on radios to see if we could get some things out that way. We would send players out into the community. I'd go out to almost any group and talk about it to try to talk up attendance. So we would do that, and I think our first year we were in the first top half of attendance. I think we averaged about 4,000, 4,500 a year in a game, and we were at the Coliseum, which 8,000 or 10,000, so it didn't look as vacant. It didn't feel as vacant, and we tried to get our seating close in so we had a little more of the fan effect there. And then the one game, we were on national TV, and Gary had said to me, you better fill that stadium. And we were playing New England, and so we huddled as a staff. We said, what can we do? And it wasn't to me, it was somebody, I think it might have been Tim Simmons, who said, hey, let's try to beat a record. And then the record for attending a women's event at that time, the largest one was at the Broadmoor when the golf tournament was down there. I think the U.S. Open. Anyway, they had quite a large event. So then we decided, okay, what about an indoor event? And I think Silbury at that time had the largest attendance when they were going if they'd won in the Elite Eight, they would have gone to the Final Four. I think it was the 16 to the 8. But anyway, they had filled the house there, and their capacity was 10 or 11,000 in the event center up there. So we decided we would do that. So what we did was we put all of our money in there, like 35, 40,000. We took out ads, we got on the radio, and we started to promote, let's help break the record. And we did. We just pummeled the whole Denver metro area with this message, and what a fun thing it would be to show up and bring them. And it was a great time of day. It was like a Saturday or Sunday, in the middle of the day. So it was just so much fun to see those people pour in. And I think we had about 13,000. And we were playing at McNichols at the time. And then the top of the cake was we beat New England in a game. And I was real close to the New England Pam Vitalis, her GM there. And she looked at me and she looked around and she said, "Lark, how many did you say you had there?" And I said, 13,000. And so that was the official account, but it was darn full. And so that was a real fun, exciting time for us. And it was real rewarding to see. If we had that budget every time, we could have come up with, 3 or 4 times, 6 times during the year where we had themes that would have been really fun at the right times of the day to get the kids and the families in. And they showed up. We had a lot of kids there with their parents, and we had a lot of women from just all the sports teams around town that like to watch, pro basketball. So it worked. We just need a little more money.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you said you played basically from October to March-ish. What did the players do outside of that?
They had the opportunity, like they still do today, to go overseas and play.
Okay.
And so some of them would. Some of them would just take some downtime.
Yeah. When the WNBA came on the scene, was that a 1-year overlap?
Yes, they started in the year that we eventually folded, I believe. Yeah. And at that point, it was very difficult to get players or coaches to commit to the ABL because you could just see the strength of the NBA behind the WNBA. Yeah. And when, I don't fault them at all for making the decisions that they made. And I'm so delighted that WNBA is in existence today and hasn't, and has been an opportunity for women pro sports. I can't say enough about how glad I am they're here.
Yeah. So the players, you played at the Coliseum, but scheduling was difficult. Where was the practice? Like, what was the regular during that season? What was the routine for the players?
Well, gosh, we got so lucky because at Regis University, Barb Schroeder was the AD at that time, and we needed a practice facility. We could hardly pay for anything. And so what Barb did is, her teams were practicing at that time too, but she said, hey, from 10 to noon on these days, they're in classes. She gave us that as a practice facility. What a wonderful, wonderful thing for Barb to do for us. And so largely we would practice in the morning, and Regis is a wonderful university. It's actually where I got my MBA in finance and accounting, so I'll plug it. But it was easy to get to. Our players could drive over there. Parking was great. It was safe, and we could just practice there. And then we had routines with weight training still, weight maintenance at that time, and then if they needed to see an athletic trainer, that was another one of our first-year staffs that was just phenomenal, was Rhonda Parker. She was an excellent trainer, and she would take care of their needs, and so if they had to go to do some stuff in the ice or some off activities to help with repair muscles and stuff, Rhonda would take care of that. So largely it was filled with practice and weights you know, and then there'd be some film time, you know, just whatever we'd do. It was a full day.
Mm-hmm.
And then the coach would manage that. Cheryl Estes would manage that in our first year, and then they would decide what the schedule would be. And they need some time off to do their own things, you know.
Mm-hmm. And they were salaried, or how exactly does that work?
But we didn't negotiate the salaries. The head did, and
Mm-hmm.
the headquarters did, and they did the salaries based upon some star power at the point they were coming into the league. So if they played in the Olympics, you know, they were going to get more. If they were a huge player on the national level, they were going to get more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, regional level would get less than, they say, a national level or an Olympic player. So that was all negotiated by the headquarters. I had nothing to do with it. None of the GMs did.
Was that something where that took care of their income for the year? That they didn't have to balance?
Not everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, it was still very meager. Some of the people were only earning $40,000 a year. Now that was back in the late '90s, but it was still, you know, on the margins.
Mm-hmm. So, let's see. Look at my notes here. So was was kind of the writing on the wall when you heard about the WNBA? I mean, was it kind of one of those things where you just thought right away, this is going to impact what we're doing, or did it feel like maybe there was going to be room for both for a while, or how did that feel?
I think I can say that for me, what I did was I worried a bit about it, but when we found out about it, we were into our second year, and we were all in. And so my focus was on our team, and I didn't give much thought to them because I didn't have any control over whether they were coming in or not. I wasn't negotiating national sponsorships, national media time like Gary and Steve were, and Ann Cribbs was the third co-founder. So I was all in, and we were working, gosh, sometimes 60, 70, 90 hours, and particularly if I would travel with the team and then come back to do the things here, I'd have quite a bit of time in, and so for 2 years it was quite a bit of that, and even in off seasons we were busy going. I was busy, the players were gone, but I was busy going to groups trying to drum up support meetings. At the end of the second year, as the third year started to come in, and I looked, I remember once I was sitting at a game, and we had done everything we could. We were at the Coliseum, we had done everything we could to get attendance. It was a night game, and it was at the Coliseum, it was like 7 at night, and I looked and I thought, I think we had 12 or 1,400 people there, and I thought to myself, I was exhausted. I just said to myself, I don't think I can do anymore. You know, I've done everything I could. I'd invested in the league as an investor when they needed funds. I'd given every bit of my time that I could, and I just looked and I just said, I think somebody else needs to come in for this third year. And so I talked to Steve and Gary about it, and I said, I don't think I can do it this third year. You deserve somebody better than me at this point because I'm just too exhausted. And so then Steve said, well, don't do anything right now. Let me just come out. So Steve came out and we talked again, and he presented a few reasons and thoughts why he thought I could and I could stay. And I could just still feel to this day that I know when I have the motivation, and when I'm in, I'm all in. And my heart was broken, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And I said, Steve, I just can't do it anymore. And you're going to be disappointed in me. And so I said, we need to plan for me to leave, and you can get somebody in because this coming year is going to be really difficult. And so then they decided to elevate John Millen to general manager in November of '96. And And then within 4 or 6 weeks, they announced bankruptcy. So I wasn't the GM anymore, but I mean, I was just barely out of the house, so to speak. So I think at the end of the second year, the beginning of the third, when I was so exhausted, and I could see, when we were on the calls with the general managers and the headquarter folks, when we could hear that, well, we didn't get this sponsor, or this player's going over to the Wnba, or we lost this. We thought we were going to get a media package for TV, and we lost that. Just thought, I don't know if we can make it. So.
Yeah, I mean, I am feeling tired just listening to all of these things. During the season, you talked about traveling. I mean, these teams are all over the country. How many games did they play a year? I mean, presumably like half of those are home games and half of those are away games?
I think we tried to get between 26 and 32 or something like that. Some home, some away. Yeah.
So you're on the road a lot during that time?
Yeah. And I didn't go to all games, but I went to a lot of them. And, still to this day, I wouldn't change anything. I mean, I loved what I did. Yeah. And it's... I believe, for me, that you have to have times in life where you just give it your all. And so then if you have to walk away because it doesn't work, you can walk away feeling like you didn't leave anything. And I did feel that way. There was nothing I left. I gave everything I had. Time, money, you name it.
So... you talked about a particularly memorable moment in filling the stadium, breaking that record. What were some other memorable moments for you from that time?
Oh, I mean, for me, my mom and dad, I'd still see them sitting up, going to games. My little nephew, Easton, would come down and sit with me on my lap, and he was like 2 or 3. My daughter was a volunteer. She was 14 at the time, and she was quite a good golfer and was doing AJGA golf, and she would come and help on the sidelines. She would help Rhonda with all of her stuff, her training stuff. We had some really wonderful players, and you could see them out in the communities. The volunteers and the interns, I had some great memories of them. We had ex-Bear. And the people who really supported us were lovely, and they'd come to our events and they'd want to help us as much as they could. So I think the support that we had was true and sincere, and it was volunteers, interns, it was fans, it was family members of our staff, and the players. Some of them were just so willing to do things, and like Debbie Black, she recorded the first quadruple double in history. She was an explosion player, and so with that, John Millen had the foresight to say, hey, here's the ball for the quadruple double. He gave it to me, and I kept it, and then it's now down in the Tennessee Women's Basketball Hall of Fame, because it's such a historic event to have that ball. Well, that was Debbie Black with a car explosion jersey on, in the Coliseum that occurred.
So explain to me and to also people watching this, what is a quadruple double?
Well, I think it's like she had steals, assists, points, and rebounds. They were all double digits.
I see.
And that's a rare feat when you think about it. And then Debbie Black is 5'2", 5'3". I mean, she was like a little Energizer bunny, and she would just go in. She was fearless. She was a fan favorite, and people just loved watching her. And that was a great moment. We had Tari Phillips, who had a beautiful voice and sang the anthem. Edna Campbell was just an eloquent player. Shelley Sheets, people loved from the Buffs, and she was a great player for us. We just had, a lot of wonderful people. Sylvia Crawley did a blinded duck at the basketball dunk at the All-Star game as an explosion player. Charlotte Smith, she had won a national championship in North Carolina, and she was on our team. And so, I mean, there were so many wonderful individual players. You know, Melody Howard came from Southwest Missouri, and she had been quite a fan favorite down there. And people loved her. And many of them were willing to go out in the community and visit and do all they could when they had an off time. So we had a great memories, you know. It's sad in the sense that we couldn't make it work, but there's a lot to be proud of, you know, in life. And, you know, I think life is just really about trying and saying, I gave it my all, and this was the right thing to do, and it didn't work this time. You know, so far a couple of other folks have tried to organize and get things going for a pro team in Colorado, and it just hasn't come to fruition. So I'm proud of all the work that the staff and volunteers and interns did, and the fans did, and our sponsors.
Yeah, so I love hearing that community existed. I mean, you know, in professional sports these days, you don't often hear about, you know, your nephew coming and sitting on your lap during a game and things like that. It just sounds like this really beautiful blend of family and community, and you know, and this professional team that people haven't seen, the kind of professional team that people haven't seen before, giving all those young kids the opportunity to see women playing professionally and so forth. It just sounds like a really beautiful thing. Once the team ended, did a lot of these women go to play for the WNBA? Was there...
Some of them did. Some of them had opportunities in the WNBA. Some went overseas, and some didn't. You know, they didn't get picked up by the WNBA because still that was a sparse opportunity. Sparse opportunity. You know, they had, I don't know if they had 12 on their rosters, and I think at the time they only still had 8 teams. They haven't expanded much beyond 12. I don't know if it's 12 now, but I mean, they still have few teams compared to men's, and the opportunities are still small, but they are surviving, you know. And some of our players did, like Crystal Robinson played, and she's been a coach now. She was another one of our key players, but she's been a coach at Seattle and Dallas. So we have a lot of folks that have found places in basketball still.
So you left to get some rest, to get some family time, get some recuperation time. Has there been basketball at this level for you since then?
No, not formally. What I like watching basketball, like the collegiate level. I do like men's and women's basketball quite a bit. And for me, it was kind of a time for soul searching. And I worked at Denver University for a while. And then one of the things that I said to myself is, what do you just really, really love? And doing, and I have always been drawn to libraries and information and thinking through things and researching things. So I went back to the University of Washington, and I did get my master's in library and information science there. They were one of the top 5 universities at the time. And I just loved that. And so then I was able to start researching, and then I was eventually employed by Deltac, which was then acquired by Wiley & Sons. It's a huge publisher. And I was their director of market strategy and research for online programs at higher-end universities. So it really just culminated all 3 of my master's degrees into there. And so my professional side was filled. And then I think one of the things I also discovered after the explosion is because I grew up, I never really had an opportunity to fulfill myself since Title IX really didn't afford those opportunities. And I started competing in triathlons, and then I had an accident where I couldn't run too well anymore, so I just started to focus on the bike. And I started to do bicycle racing, and I did the Senior Olympics, and then there's this race called Race Across America on your bike, and I did that.
Wow.
And when we finished, it was a 4-women's team, and there were 3 women's teams in the event that year, and there were 1 younger category team and 2 in our category. Well, we finished first out of all 3 teams. We even beat the young ones. And I got through, I got to the end, and I just felt complete, like I'd completed myself. And I finally was able to say I could compete at a high level if given the opportunity and still be a kind, grateful person for the people that helped make that event possible for me, because you don't do an event like that unless you have great crew and staff, and we did, and I was just so grateful to them throughout the entire United States for the opportunity they gave me. And I told them frequently how lucky I was to have them, because they made it possible. So beyond that, I have felt completed. And when I retired, I was able to grow myself into learning how to be a person who could care for others. And I ended up caring for my mom, Christine, my AD at Iowa, who she was in hospice care for a while, and even prior to that, I'd go out, help her, and then I have a young grand that needs some help, and I help him still to this day. So I've been really lucky. I've completed myself physically, and I've completed kind of my professional life, and now my kind of role where it's time to give back to others. I learned how to be pretty good at that, but I still got some ways I can.
I feel like we all do, but it sounds to me like that was always there, for you. Just in hearing you talk about your family connections all the way through, starting with playing pickup with your brothers all the way to where you are now. So it's wonderful to hear you.
Had a seed there, but I could have been better there, so I'm glad I'm learning it now.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I feel like we're kind of drawing to a close, but I want to make sure that if there's anything else that you think we really need to know, that we hear that from you.
Well, first, I appreciate the opportunity to have this historically recorded, so that's really, really nice in case it's meaningful to others down the road. And then I guess I would just say to anybody, just don't be afraid to try. Just give it your all, be thoughtful about it, be kind about it, and try. And if it doesn't work, well, something will come along. So that's it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop the recordings.